On World News Tonight, show of support. Dangling hope of EU membership, European leaders visit Kiev, establishing a path for Ukraine. Stunning evidence. A new revelation by Donald Trump pressuring his own vice president to overturn the election. Extreme weather. Dramatic flooding on one end of the United States and unusually high temperatures on the other, with the United Kingdom being the latest hit. And bonding sport. The limelight falls on man's best fuzzy friends to showcase their talents. Good evening, thank you for joining us on World News Tonight. We start off tonight's broadcast with an update on the continuous crisis in Ukraine. The leaders of France, Germany and Italy visited Ukraine in a show of support to Kiev. Hopes will be followed by more weapons and tougher action to help in the war with Russia.
A show of support among the rubble in Erupted after French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi arrived in Ukraine early on Thursday. Kiev hopes their visit brings concrete action. All three leaders are seeking to overcome Ukraine's criticism of their response to its fight against Russia's invasion. Irpin was one of the main hotspots of fighting with Russian troops in the north before they pulled back to intensify their offensive in the east. Ukraine says Russia committed large-scale atrocities here, which Russia denies. Macron called the town heroic and said there were signs war crimes were committed. The French president has been criticised at home and abroad for not going to Ukraine earlier. He has repeatedly said he would only go if and when the visit could be useful and not just symbolic. The trio arrived together by train in a show of unified solidarity, but it remains to be seen what concrete steps they bring.
A message of unity we're sending to the Ukrainians, yes, of support, to speak about today, but also the future, because we know the weeks to come will be very difficult.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky wants his visitors to deliver more arms to help his hard-pressed army withstand the Russian invaders. Kiev has accused France, Germany and to a lesser extent Italy of foot-dragging, being slow to deliver weapons and putting their own prosperity ahead of Ukraine's freedom and security. Ukraine has been particularly critical of Germany's military aid and wants Scholz to hand over heavy weapons that have been promised but not yet delivered. Scholz has dismissed allegations he's held back, saying Germany was one of the biggest military and financial backers of Ukraine. Kiev officials have also expressed fears of pressure to accept a peace deal favourable to Russia, which calls its invasion a special military operation. The Kremlin said the leaders' visit shouldn't only focus on supplying weapons to Ukraine. It's absolutely useless, spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said, and will prolong suffering and cause further damage. The European Union's executive is expected to propose on Friday that Ukraine become a formal candidate for membership, diplomats and officials say. That would be a significant political gesture to Ukraine, but it's also something EU leaders are divided on.
Along with the EU leaders, NATO defense ministers also discuss ways to bolster forces and deterrence along the military alliance's eastern borders in Ukraine.
NATO says it wants to coordinate efforts better on how to further support Ukraine and strengthen its own defensive capabilities. Defense ministers from the military alliance were meeting in Brussels where they said they will deploy more NATO troops to strengthen its eastern flank, as well as sending more weapons stockpiles so as to be prepared.
Russia's aggression is a game changer, so NATO must maintain credible deterrence and strong defense. Today, ministers addressed the scale and the design of our future posture and how we can step up across all domains with substantial strengthening of our presence, capabilities and readiness.
In the meantime, the Ukrainians are still pushing for more weapons, which they say need to arrive faster as heavy fighting continues in the east, with key locations under intense bombardment. One expert told that there's a significant gap between what the Ukrainians want and what they're actually getting.
So far, they've gotten 1/2 the number of tanks they need, 1/6 the number of multiple rocket launchers, and about 1/4 of the howitzers they need. So there is a gap between what the Ukrainians want and what has been provided so far. And we are at a point where the battle in Donbass is at a critical moment, because if the Russians, and I say if, succeed in closing the pocket and cutting off Ukrainian troops, the Ukrainians could lose up to 10 to 20,000 of some of their best trained and most experienced soldiers who cannot be readily replaced by raw recruits.
The defence ministers' meeting came ahead of a NATO summit in Madrid at the end of the month, where it will agree on setting out a new common position on Russia, but also on the emerging challenge of China.
Over to India now. Protests have erupted in India's northeastern Bihar state in response to a new military recruitment system. Potential recruits, military veterans, opposition leaders, and even some members of Modi's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party have raised reservations over the revamp process. In Bihar state, protesters shouted slogans and performed push-ups to emphasize their fitness for service. Protesters attacked railway properties, settling all-right coaches in at least 2 locations, damaging train tracks and vandalizing a station and an office of India's ruling party. Called Agnipath, or the Path of Fire program, the system was announced on Tuesday and aims to hire soldiers for 4 years only, as the army tries to cut its pension expenditure and modernize its forces with younger personnel. The government plans to open 46,000 spots to those aged between 17.5 and 21 years old. But after the 4-year period, only a quarter of them will be able to stay in the army. Previously, soldiers were recruited by the Army, Navy and Air Force separately and typically entered service for up to 17 years for the lowest ranks. The shorter tenure has caused concern among potential recruits. The Bank of England has followed the US Federal Reserve in raising interest rates. Both economies are battling the highest level of inflation in years and hope tighter monetary policy will curb the spiraling price rises.
The Bank of England raised rates Thursday for the 5th time since December. Its benchmark rate went up by 0.25 percentage point to 1.25%, its highest level since early 2009. Some analysts had expected more, following a 0.75 percentage point increase by the US Federal Reserve the day before. Instead, the BOE stuck to a gradual approach, but warned that it was ready to act forcefully to stamp out inflation. Central banks around the world are racing to cool price rises. In the UK, they are forecast to exceed 10% later this year, partly thanks to soaring energy costs. Last month, Bank Governor Andrew Bailey said consumers needed to brace for impact.
I'm afraid the one that I am going to sound, I guess, rather apocalyptic about is food.
But Bailey has to tread carefully, with policymakers also worried about triggering a recession. The UK economy is already showing signs of a slowdown and is forecast to be among the weakest of rich countries next year. Even so, traders bet that more rate hikes are on the way. Markets are pricing in a rate of almost 3% as soon as December. Earlier Thursday, the Swiss National Bank shocked markets with its first rate hike since 2007. Stocks tumbled following the news. Analysts said it was telling that one of the most dovish of central banks was now worried about inflation. Europe's Stoxx 600 index was down over 2% by lunchtime following the 2 rate hikes.
Over to the United States now. Former President Donald Trump pressured his Vice President Mike Pence to overturn his 2020 election defeat, despite being told repeatedly it was illegal to do so.
Tonight, the January 6th committee presenting new evidence of what was happening behind the scenes as the mob surged into the Capitol. What they say is a culmination of a failed pressure campaign by former President Trump designed to force Mike Pence to overturn the election results. In newly revealed testimony, close aides and advisors detailing a private phone call between the president and vice president the morning of the 6th.
The conversation was pretty heated.
I remember hearing the word wimp. Either he called him a wimp. I don't remember if he said, "You are a wimp."
Like me, you're not tough enough to make the call.
It was a different tone than I'd heard him take with the vice president before.
Do you remember what she said? Her father called him
the P word.
But Pence, relying on advice from his legal team and on his faith, stayed firm, even after coming within 40 feet of the rioters.
He resisted the pressure
He knew it was illegal. He knew it was wrong. We're fortunate for Mr. Pence's courage on January 6th. Our democracy came dangerously close to catastrophe.
Pence was evacuated to a safe location deep beneath the Capitol. These never-before-seen pictures showing the vice president making calls to Pentagon officials and congressional leaders, working through the attack and refusing to leave the Capitol.
The vice president did not want to take any chance that the world would see the vice president of the United States fleeing the United States Capitol. He was determined that we would complete the work that we had set out to do that day.
The committee says the plan to have Pence reject the election results began with a lawyer named John Eastman, who witnesses say knew the idea was illegal and unconstitutional, and who later requested a presidential pardon.
I said, "Are you out of your effing mind?" I said, "You're completely crazy." I said, "You're going to turn around and tell 78+ million people in this country that your theory is this is how you're going to invalidate their votes because you think the election was stolen?" And I said, "They're not going to tolerate that." I said, "You're going to cause riots in the streets."
I assert my Fifth Amendment right.
Eastman repeatedly pled the Fifth when questioned by the committee. Republicans continuing to pan the proceedings as a distraction.
We've got record inflation, soaring gas prices. What are they focused on? What gets their primetime billing? It is their seething hatred for Donald Trump and anybody who's ever supported him.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. Welcome back to World News Tonight. We are going to the United Kingdom now. Many leaders around the world criticize for the handling of climate change. That now temperatures of 34 degrees Celsius expected this week as the United Kingdom basks in some record early summer heat.
The UK is no stranger to heat waves, but temperatures are climbing unusually high for this time in the summer. So who needs Santorini when you have Skegness? The UK hotter than some Greek islands on the country's hottest day of the year so far, with Friday set to break the record again.
I don't mind the hot weather. I like a bit of sun.
I love the sunshine, but I don't like the heat. This is lovely, like this, with a bit of shade.
Get me sun cream on and whatever and chill out.
Could be hotter. I love it. I must admit, I would like it to be hotter.
You've got to be mindful when you're with the little ones, definitely. I tend to let him have as many ice ladders as he wants to have throughout the day.
It's been a horrendous 2 years for everybody, and it's nice to see everybody enjoying themselves.
It's nearly 50 years since the country's highest June temperature. That was here in Southampton's Mayflower Park, when in 1976 it hit 35.6 degrees. The early summer heat may be great news for some, but as ever, it's a concern for farmers' crops and the elderly. A level 3 heat health alert issued for central and southern England to warn the public of the dangers. The high temperatures will be over by Sunday, but some experts are linking the intense June heat to climate change. So it could well be a sign of what's to come as UK summers get hotter.
Brutal weather conditions ranging from extreme heat to tornadoes are plaguing several states in the US as well. While extreme weather has moved out of Montana, devastation after the Yellowstone National Park flood remains.
Tonight, with 81 million Americans broiling in record and deadly heat, states like Kansas and Ohio feel like an oven. In the Midwest, a double threat: excessive heat and damaging tornadoes carving through Wisconsin.
Hey boys, we got a tornado, let's go!
New video of flooded roads into a washed-out Yellowstone show mass devastation.
This is a historic event, a 1,000-year event.
Because some entrances into America's oldest national park could be impassable for months.
There are a lot of things to do, not only in Yellowstone, but also outside of Yellowstone, our gateway communities. But it is going to look a little different when it comes to figuring out how to manage visitation in only half of the park.
Hoping to reopen Yellowstone's south entrance within weeks, a limited number of visitors could be allowed in to see Old Faithful, the stunning majestic meadows, and perhaps catch a glimpse of the free-roaming bison, all unimpacted by the floods.
You should receive an email pretty quickly confirming that cancellation.
But for businesses like Paradise Adventure Company, dependent on the nearly 1 million summer tourists who visit Yellowstone every month, the floods could sink their bottom line. Tonight, one disaster has passed, but another, perhaps even more devastating, could lie ahead.
Elon Musk addressed Twitter employees for the first time, and while he spoke of possible job cuts, he also mused on the existence of aliens in a session that provided little insight into his planned $44 billion takeover of the company.
Elon Musk delivered his first ever address to Twitter employees, but offered few new details about his $44 billion planned takeover of the social media company, including when it will close. Instead, the billionaire, according to a source, appeared in a video call Thursday from what looked like a kitchen and engaged in a freewheeling Q&A in which he mused on the existence of aliens and other space civilizations and said that Twitter should help, quote, civilization and consciousness. The few specifics Musk did give about the company were focused on possibly cutting jobs, but that anyone who was a, quote, significant contributor should have nothing to worry about. Musk also told Twitter staffers he wants to raise the platform's user numbers from 229 million to at least 1 billion people, and said advertising would remain important despite previously saying he believes Twitter should not show ads. In audio of the meeting, Musk said, quote, "I'm not against advertising. I would probably talk to the advertisers and say, like, hey, let's just make sure the ads are as entertaining as possible." His comments appeared to do little to appease employees who took to an internal Slack channel in droves during the session, posting memes and complaining that Musk was not providing useful answers on his vision for the business and employee compensation. The impending takeover of Twitter has been met with widespread skepticism and concern among the San Francisco-based company's employees, some of whom have worried Musk will relax rules on certain content. The billionaire told Twitter staff he believed users should be allowed to say pretty outrageous things on the site as long as the content is not illegal.
Los Angeles, Toronto and Mexico City have been named among the host cities for the 2026 World Cup in the United States, Canada and Mexico, marking the first time the tournament will be shared by these three different countries.
FIFA said Thursday that a list of 16 cities across the United States, Canada, and Mexico will be host cities for the 2026 Men's World Cup. The sprawling soccer championship will be the biggest ever for FIFA, the first to have 48 teams play, from New York to Vancouver, from Mexico City to Kansas City. FIFA President Gianni Infantino said he hopes the event will make soccer the biggest sport in the U.S. by the time it all kicks off.
I think this part of the world doesn't realize what will happen here in 2026. I mean, these three countries will be put upside down and then flipped again back. The world will be invading Canada, Mexico, and the United States, and they will be invaded by a big wave of joy and of happiness, because that's what football is about.
The 1994 World Cup, the last time the U.S. hosted, sparked a boom in popularity for soccer in America, with Major League Soccer kicking off its inaugural season 2 years later. At a watch party of Thursday's announcement, New York Mayor Eric Adams painted his city's host status as a victory after 2 years of lockdowns and uncertainty. On Thursday, there was still no indication of where the opening game or the final would be played. 16 cities were selected for the championship, but there were 22 initial bids. Among those left out were Pasadena, Cincinnati, and the U.S. Capitol. Washington, D.C. would have jointly hosted with Baltimore.
Welcome back to World News Tonight. For more news, let's take you around the world in a minute. Heavy rain brought flash floods to the streets of northeast China's Harbin city. Floodwater levels in some parts of the city have reached up to 2.62 feet. Local authorities said that they are taking measures to remove excess water and debris from the city streets. After fleeing Afghanistan for Iraq following the Taliban's return to power last year, 32 students received their bachelor's degree in various fields including law, computer science and business. The World Trade Organization, holding its first in-person conference in 5 years, has extended it in the hope of reaching agreements on key issues, including subsidies for fisheries and food security. That is all from us here at World News Tonight. Join us again on Monday as we keep you up to date with the latest from around the world. In case you missed any of the stories tonight, you can watch the whole program on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/otherderana English. As we conclude tonight, let's take a look at the many breeds of dogs preparing to participate in the Westminster Kennel Club Dog Show. Have a good night.